Okay, we are going to take a look at Bowens family systems theory. Bowens theory was probably the most pivotal and foundational in family and couples therapy, and even in individual therapy, because it really shined light on the way that families influence individual members. In other words, we are created within this context, meaning that everything that happens in a family affects each individual member, and each individual member affects the family. So it's a system of where one part affects all the others, and the others affects that one part. So each family has just individuals that cannot be understood in isolation from that family system. So even when I have an individual coming to me for therapy, I really look at that individual within the context in which he lives or in which he or she was raised, because that influences his or her thoughts and behaviors. The central goal in Bowen's theory and therapy is to help clients understand their family patterns and to increase self-differentiation, reduce emotional reactivity, and just really help them become more aware of their role in the family system and how that family system has influenced them. So the core assumptions of Bowen's theory are that, again, families are interdependent systems. This means, as you see with the image here, is that each member of a family influences, it's like parts of a cog in a system, influence all the other members, and the other members influence them. And so it's so powerful just to recognize how the thoughts, behaviors, and feelings in one member affect those thoughts, feelings, and behaviors of the other members, and vice versa. So it's this reciprocal, interdependent relationship. And these patterns in families repeat. It's like families often transmit behaviors and emotional processes across generations. So we see generational patterns that are passed down, these emotional patterns that are passed down from one generation to the next. So understanding the origins helps couples see their conflicts not as just individual issues, but as part of more of an inherited emotional process that's been passed on from their family of origin and from the previous generations. Okay, so there's 8 concepts of Bowen's theory. Now, when I go over these concepts, I want you to even think about your own family and yourself in relationship to your family process. So the first one of these concepts is differentiation of self. And this really just means the ability to separate thinking from feeling and maintain individuality while still staying emotionally connected. In other words, we are confident to be able to have our own thoughts and feelings and opinions. We don't feel as though we are so intertwined with another person that we can't think or feel on our own, or that we can't express our own opinions. So in healthier families, you'll see a clear distinction in the differentiation of self. In less healthy families, you'll see that there's less differentiation of self. And the less differentiation of self there is, the more triangles there are. This is the next concept in Bowen's theory, is the concept of triangles. Triangles are the smallest stable relationship unit. Its tension between two people often involves a third. So like a child, a parent, or even somebody even outside a family. So again, when you see it, think of a triangle. It's a triad. It includes three people. And so one point on the triangle is a person, say for instance, one of the children in the family who's in the hot seat, while the other two could be the parents are aligned with one another on this other side of the triangle against the child. I see it in a lot when families bring their what they call their rebellious teenager to me for therapy. The family, the parents have aligned against the child. So the child's in that third position on the triangle, the hot seat, the hot seat. So, and this is really important to recognize because, recognizing those triangles, and also, one of the things that I say in therapy is the problem is not the problem. The problem is actually the symptom. So when a family brings their child to me and tells me to fix that child because the child is the problem, I see the child's behavior as the symptom of the family dysfunction. So, okay, so the next Bowen concept is the nuclear family emotional system. This is just, the emotional patterns within a couple or family that maintain anxiety. And next we have the family projection process. Pretty much how parents project their own emotional issues onto their children. And of course, this happens at a subconscious level. I mean, there's not that intentional effort to create anxiety, but we often we often pass our own anxious patterns onto our children. I mean, think about how we do it. I see how I've done it in my life. I'm an overthinker. I'm a what-ifer. I'm and I see my own children they're young adults now doing the same thing. So then we also have the multi-generational transmission process. Emotional patterns are passed down through the generation. It's fascinating we'll talk about this in a minute when we talk about genograms, is just seeing how the emotional patterns are transmitted from one generation to the next. So even those differentiation levels are transmitted. We see that the processes, I mean, even traumas are transmitted in different forms. So, unresolved trauma for instance, can show up as substance abuse in one generation and depression or suicide in the next. So then we have emotional cutoff. So what happens when things get too anxious, when there's that lack of differentiation of self, when there's those triangles, when there's a lot of anxiety in the system, members distance themselves. So this is how they manage those unresolved issues. Because remember, in unhealthy families, there is a lack of conflict resolution. There's a lack of differentiation of self. And so things get heated and people pull apart. It could be, emotional cutoff can even look like geographic moves. But as we know, moving geographically is not going to resolve it. And so there's, so it's really being able to work through conflict openly and honestly without having to cut off. I see this in a lot of families. I've even seen it in my own family. So then we have a sibling position, and birth order influences personality development and even relationship patterns. Adler recognized this in his famous birth order theory, and really talking about how different birth order positions are born into different psychological and physical environments within that family. So think about it. The oldest child is born into a family where he or she gets all the attention because there's no other siblings. He or she is expected to walk sooner, talk sooner. The focus is totally on him or her. And then the second child comes along, and what Adler referred to as dethroning, dethrones the first child. And the second child has his or her own, develops his or her own personality traits, obviously based on the environment, but also just that sibling position. The middle child comes along, and as we know, that middle child is considered the peacemaker, the conflict avoider, kind of feels like he or she doesn't belong, because he or she is kind of sandwiched in between sibling positions. And then the youngest is considered the least responsible, the class clown. And again, that is, attributed to the sibling position and the environment that he or she was born into. So sibling position really does matter. So it's one of the things that we want to look at when we do therapy, when we work with clients. Then we have this societal emotional process. Societal anxiety mirrors family functioning. So, and here's what I'm seeing is years ago there was such an emphasis on family, and because of that emphasis, families were more connected, they were more together, and as society has, I don't want to say progressed, it's almost like we've regressed. There's less of an emphasis on family. We see so many broken families. We see a disconnect. We see more anxiety in families. We see more substance abuse, mental illness. And, really it boils down to a little bit of that whole, that lack of support from that family system and dysfunction in that family system. So those are the 8 concepts. These are, something that we see in all families. And as counselors, we observe these concepts in the families that we work with, in the couples that we work with, and even in the individuals that we work with. And just how do we do that, especially in couples therapy? So some of the things that we have to remember, again, is couples often replicate their emotional patterns from their families of origin. So remember, we have 2 people coming into a marriage, each with their own emotional patterns from their families of origin. And they're going to replicate that in the couple dynamic. And then, of course, that dynamic is going to be transmitted to their children. So again, that's how we see that that multi-generational pattern, that multi-generational transmission of emotions within a family systems and within the generations. So counselors help couples identify interlocking triangles. These could be one partner triangulating with the child or parent. For instance, sometimes I see a parent, one member of a couple, a spouse being upset and angry with the other spouse. So they'll align with one of the children against that spouse. They'll talk about that spouse with the child. So that's triangulating in a child, a family, another family member into the conflict. So we also, the focus shifts from blame to understanding in counseling, in couples counseling. So this is really what we want to work on by illuminating some of these triangles and some of these multi-generational patterns that we see in families. So this helps bring understanding to those patterns that are creating distress within the couples and within the family systems. And what we want to do also as therapists, we want to encourage that self-differentiation. We want to help each partner maintain their sense of self while remaining emotionally connected. And this is really, involves taking this whole I position, I feel, and also helping them be okay with having their own feelings and having their own opinions and having their own identity. So, for instance, let's think about a spouse who grew up in a conflict avoidant home Remember, a conflict avoidant, everybody avoids conflict. They don't talk about it. Sometimes there's that emotional cutoff. Um, this spouse who grew up in this type of home might shut down during arguments. So if this person is arguing with their spouse, they're just going to disconnect and shut down. And this triggers their partner's anxiety. So when we understand this dynamic and the roots of this dynamic, it helps the couple respond with empathy instead of reactivity. So when they're able to see their dynamic for really what it is, they are able to have more empathy towards one another and understand where these dynamics came from and how to work through this dynamic. Because remember, the important thing is it's really stopping this cycle and stopping this multi-generational transmission so that it doesn't get transmitted to the next generation. It's creating health. So the role of the therapist in this approach is to create really just a non-anxious, calm presence. And, we want to be just that neutral, calm presence for the family, for the couple, for the individual, because it helps set the tone. It helps bring calmness. We model that calm behavior for them. And quite honestly, sometimes this is difficult because we might have a couple that comes in and is yelling and screaming, and trying to maintain calm in that situation can be very difficult. And so, but it's important to fake it, and just to recognize, okay, when we begin to see, as counselors, when we begin to see these arguments and this yelling and screaming is really just patterns of behavior that have been passed down through the generations, and really kind of see them through those analytical eyes, it helps us maintain that calmness. So we also want to promote awareness of patterns. And we'll talk about that in just a minute, but we coach and guide. So again, we are using some psychoeducation, we're coaching and we're guiding. We're somewhat of an objective observer. We don't take sides, we don't align with one member over the other. I know sometimes this can be hard to do, but it's really important that we avoid taking sides. We avoid the impression that we're taking sides. We do not align with one of the spouses over the other. We also promote self-responsibility. And this is just simply just helping equip each member of a family or each partner in a dyad with the tools and letting them know that change is possible, but it's up to them. We also facilitate differentiation, and we'll talk about that in just a minute, but really it's helping each member of a family or each partner learn that it's okay to have their own feelings, to have their own emotions, to have their own ideas and opinions. And then we also use genograms to explore the patterns. So this really ties in with the techniques in Bowenian couple counseling and family counseling is genogram construction. That's probably one of the most pivotal techniques in this systems approach. And I have a whiteboard. I also have a big easel that has a huge pad of paper, and I will either use one or the other. I do prefer to use the easel because then I can draw. The family can then take that drawing home of the genogram. If I do it on the whiteboard, they can also take a picture, and sometimes it is easier on the whiteboard because I can erase and all that fun stuff. So we construct the genogram, and we usually depict 3 generations. We show how these patterns of whatever it's emotional conflict, patterns of trauma, patterns of emotional cutoff, we depict that in our genogram. So the drawings will depict those emotional patterns. And these are the visual representations of what's going on in a family. And if a couple or a family can see this, it really brings that understanding and awareness that we are looking for, that our goal is in couples and family counseling, is understanding and awareness of those multi-generational patterns. So again, we coach the clients into differentiating or into disengaging from those triangles rather than necessarily correcting. So we want to teach them, we want to equip them with the tools to create these healthy patterns, to break this cycle. So we want to de-triangulate. So what we're trying to do is we disrupt and neutralize these emotional triangles or situations where anxiety between two people is diffused by bringing in a third party. So in families, we might see again a father and daughter aligning against a mother. So there's always, in a triad, there's always somebody in that hot seat. That third person is always in that hot seat. So what we want to do is we want to go in and recognize these triangles and disrupt them. In a couple, we might, where there's no children, we might see them pulling in somebody from outside that couple dyad to create a triad. So this could be somebody from work. This could even be a parent. For instance, I had a couple yesterday that they had only been married for about a year, no children, but the wife would constantly draw the mother into that relationship as that third party. So when she was mad with the spouse, with her husband, she would go to her mother and complain. So this created a triangle that was very unhealthy. So we want to, as counselors, we want to help identify the triangles that we see in a family system or in a dyad, in a couple, and neutralize that triangle. We want to de-triangulate. And we really do that by helping differentiate, helping them, helping couples remain calm and connected during conflict. And creating differentiation of self is being able to have one's own feelings, emotions, opinions, thoughts, without feeling like they have to please another person or feeling like they can't speak up for themselves. So the process of doing this and creating a differentiation is encouraging those I statements. Remember, we've talked about I statements in the past. Is I feel angry, I feel sad, because. So in other words, when we hear a client saying, you make me angry, we will say, here's your I statements. I feel angry because. So we just want to coach them in how to use those I statements and how to reframe, and not really recognizing that they have their own thoughts and feelings, that nobody's making them feel this certain way, that they are responsible for their own feelings, is empowering, and it helps differentiate the self. So this, in doing so, it reduces anxiety, it reduces the triangles as well, because the person is now able to speak directly to the other person that he or she is having conflict with. They are able to express their opinions and their feelings to the person that they are having conflict with, so that they don't have to draw in a third person. So there are many strengths of Bowens theory, and quite honestly, I integrate pieces of his theory into every approach that I use. In fact, it's kind of foundational, really. It's sort of this whole underlying guiding force when I work with individuals, when I work with couples, and when I work with families. So it's almost become sort of second nature for me to see individuals in light of this whole family system. And, and obviously when I see families or see couples, I see them within this system's framework. Bowen's theory really, it helps promote that long-term change that we want to see. It reduces reactivity, and it produces and promotes emotional maturity. It's applicable across generations. Because here's what's really cool: if we can work with a couple or one family, we are actually, it's going to reduce this whole multi-generational transition. We can stop it in its tracks so that that pattern does not get passed down to the next generation. And also, Bowen's theory integrates really well with faith-based practices and faith-based perspective. So, what are the limitations of Bowen's theory? Really, honestly, there's not too many limitations. It's so applicable to just really any family, any couple, any individual. Um, but some do argue that it can be too intellectual, especially for those highly emotional couples that come in a state of crisis. Um, in that moment, they just need that crisis intervention. They don't want to take the time to do any type of genogram or to understand their patterns. They need just this whole crisis intervention at that moment. And some clients might find systemic thinking is too abstract or slow moving. They want to pick up the pace. They don't want to take the opportunity to really understand those patterns, which is a really important component of Bowen's theory. And it's important for change. Sometimes insight is the impetus to change. And when we can understand those patterns, we are more likely to change those patterns. Also, Bowen's theory requires strong therapeutic, a therapist that's very neutral. And this can be difficult if you have a situation where one member, like one partner, is abusive or manipulative. Um, I've struggled with this myself, and I've had couples that come in and one partner's very highly narcissistic, and wants to just blame. So and with a couple where there's intimate partner violence, it can be difficult, but it can also be very illuminating as well. So I find it very helpful if it's approached in a way that you can maintain that neutrality. And remember, when you are going into a situation and where there is IPV, it's really about bringing that calmness, and doing the genogram can just be so revealing, and we can see these patterns, this pattern of abuse that has been passed down from one generation to the next, or this pattern of what trauma response, or even understanding how these patterns were transmitted within their own culture. So I feel like a lot of the limitations of Bowen's theory can be overcome, even when you're working with a client that's in immediate crisis and needs that some sort of conflict resolution at that moment. You can help reduce the emotionality and resolve the immediate crisis, and then you can help work on some of the things, that differentiation of self, triangulation, all that kind of stuff later.